not child, and don't cry. Your folks might understand you by and by. Just move on up toward your destination.
All right. Well, welcome everybody to another edition of Labor Live at 5. I'm your host, Rick Levy, president of the Texas AFL-CIO. And let me first say that I hope everybody out there has power to watch this. I hope everybody has water to at least boil and have some refreshments while they're watching. But it has been a hellacious week. We know that people have gone through hell. Certainly we have, our members have, all across the state. And what we thought we wanted to do with tonight's show is to talk to an expert about what really happened. I think those of you who have seen Greg Abbott give his remarks, those of you who have seen other state folks try and explain away their own culpability in this are probably wondering, well, what the hell did happen? So we scoured the state and we found what we think is somebody that actually knows what they're talking about, which will be good. And so tonight, Alan Cutler, who's an international rep with the IBEW, the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, and has a long history in this industry, has agreed to come share his views and his understanding of what happened, number one, and number two, what we need to do to make sure it doesn't happen again. So Alan, welcome, and thanks a lot for joining us tonight.
You're welcome, Rick. Welcome.
All right, where are you? Where are you physically?
San Antonio.
San Antonio. Okay. And you've been dealing with this industry for quite a while. Give us a little bit of a history about the different positions you've had and some of the ways you've come to learn about electricity in Texas.
Well, I came to Texas. I actually started in the utility industry in 81 at in nuclear power at San Onofre in Southern California. Came here in 89 to work as a contractor, as a chemtech, and work as a contractor for a startup of Comanche Peak in Glen Rose, Texas. And I've had was a chemtech and a lead there till 2008, and was elected business manager of the local, and spent there till 2017, and I've been on staff for 3 years now, four for International 7th District at IBEW.
Great. Well, that's certainly given you a front row seat in terms of what's happening in this state. So you were involved in actually running and operating the nuclear power plant up in North Texas.
Correct.
And representing the workers that work there.
We did.
Okay. And now do you also then you work with the other utility locals and just kind of represent the interests of workers in that industry?
That's one of my primary functions as international rep, is to service the utility locals here in Texas. I service Local 500, which is CPS Energy here in San Antonio, 2337 IBEW, which is all of Luminant, TXU, Vistra, whatever title you want to give it, of East Texas. So that's the coal generation and gas plants in East Texas, and the Comanche Peak Nuclear Station.
Okay.
Glen Rose, yeah.
Got it. And so what, so as we saw yesterday happen, and just for the folks that are watching, the IBEW are the folks that have powered this state for as long as we've all been here, in the utility industry, but also building power plants, but also mining the raw materials necessary to generate electricity in this state. They're not the only ones. We have some folks from AFSCME who are also involved in power for particularly municipal employees here in Austin. But by far the bulk of the work done in the utility industry is done by folks that are represented by the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers. And so certainly appreciate all of their work in keeping our lights on and doing what they can to make this work. But last week it didn't work. So Alan, we have people asking questions. We're in the energy capital of the world. We have more oil, more gas, more wind than any other state just about. How could it be that in this storm we ended up with people freezing to death, literally, not being able to turn their lights on and not having water to drink. What happened?
A lot of issues to unbundle. Water is a separate issue.
Right.
I can speak to it, but power. So there is a fair amount of margin or extra capacity here in Texas to meet demand, especially in those emergency or peak situations, the heat of summer or freezing temperatures like we had. And real simple, straightforward, we lost capacity such that we almost couldn't meet the demand. Currently, if you go to the ERCOT website, there's 56,000 megawatts of capacity here in the state of Texas. Current demand today was 36,000 megawatts. It's quite a bit of margin. Well, if you drop 10, 15,000 and you're going to 45,000, you can see the lines cross and you lose. What the first thing that happens is that ERCOT has to determine the areas that are not going to lose power, the primary areas, first responders, hospitals, those areas where they redirect, and some areas lose power because there's no margin or the demand exceeded the capacity.
Okay, let's talk about that for 1 second. So in most places, right, the utilities that generate power are regulated by the state, right? And so they make a commitment to the state to present a certain amount of energy to the grid to power the state, right? But that's not the case in Texas. How does it work in Texas on those for those decisions?
Well, it's bifurcated. So generation of power is not regulated.
Right.
Transmission and distribution,
right,
it is still regulated. So
right.
that part, you might hear the lines and the transmission lines, but the generation, however electricity is generated, is not regulated in the state of Texas.
Right. So that's up to each individual provider how much they're going to commit to provide, right? And if they don't feel like they can make enough money by making power available, then they're not going to generate it, and there's nobody that can make them, right?
They have contracts to generate, and if those contracts, they can meet that without having to bring up more power, that's correct. They will speculate and go on the speculative market to make it.
Right.
But yes, their generation and how they produce that power and how much they produce is up to the individual contracts they make with municipalities and large businesses.
Right. And then they also they're not required to keep a reserve on hand, right? Texas doesn't require, we can't require, because we don't regulate the generation of power. We can't require them to maintain a reserve for situations like that either, right?
ERCOT attempts to do that through incentive contracts, and it's not that effective, obviously.
Right. And so how come Texas is like that? Why is Texas so different that way? What happened?
Legislature passed deregulation law in 2001, as our earlier conversation was. We believe that changed the market from one of regulated and treating the commodity of electricity as a public service, something to be controlled. And the companies still operated as independent entities, but they had obligations under the PUC to provide, and there was just a standard, and their ability to make money was regulated by the state. Now it changed to where it's just a free market. ERCOT is also different. I'm sure many people are already aware of this or know, but we're our own independent entity. ERCOT stands alone at most of the Texas border. El Paso is part of the Western FERC, and the Panhandle is in that as well. Certain areas of Texas, but the vast majority of Texas is standalone.
Okay, now I'm going to let our viewers in on a little secret here. I mean, I haven't had hot water, right? So I haven't been able to shave. I'm sorry if I offend you by the way I look. My bad. But I was around when that bill was passed in 2001 that deregulated the industry in Texas. And labor stood against that. And we stood against it for exactly what happened now, is that if you leave our electric grid up to the private profit motive of private companies, then it's not going to operate in the public interest. It's just not. And I remember that the main advocate for this was a guy by the name of Kenneth Lay, who people might remember was the head of the infamous Enron Corporation. They spread money all over the Capitol, and they are the true, parent of this deregulated system, because their idea was, as a natural gas corporation, they could then be freed from the shackles of the state to earn a lot of money for their stakeholders. And so what we talked about then is exactly what happened. And one of the things that we really talked about, and you and I were talking about this earlier, is what the incentives are to maintain the system as reliable. And how now, back then, if a company saw that it was necessary to do winterization to keep their plants running, or to do the maintenance on the plant, they knew that if they spent that money, they would get a return on that money. That was the deal, right? But now there's no incentive to do that maintenance in the same way. The financial incentives are different. Am I right or wrong? Oh, what happened? Something happened to you. Did you mute yourself? Yeah. I can't hear you. I don't know if other people can. Can y'all hear him in the comments? Let me know whether you can hear Alan or not, because it seems like we lost an audio. Yeah. Can't hear you. Yeah. So I guess he's going to come back in. So I'm going to explain this then. I see a lot of questions in the chat about, like, why is this different? Like, why can we meet the demand in the summer and we can't in the winter? And the reason is because the reason why the plants failed was because they weren't winterized properly, that the lines froze, that the equipment froze, to the natural gas plants, and the coal plants, et cetera. At least he's not a cat. Thank you, Christine. Alan, are you a cat? I still can't hear you. Oh my God. It's the saddest thing that's ever happened. They're having to listen to me, like, all by myself. I mean, I can see people like covering their ears even as we speak. We'll keep working on it, and I'll keep talking, I guess. So people ask, why isn't it like this in the summer when it is like this at this time? And things froze. And the reason why they froze is because, despite ERCOT's suggestion that the companies winterize their plants, the companies didn't do it because they didn't understand, they didn't see that it would be profitable for them to do so. So they just didn't do it. And there was no ability for the state to say everybody has to maintain 15% reserve capacity like they do in other states. And so when this happened unexpectedly, Texas was not in a position to respond to the needs as they existed. And so, and then what we had was, in other parts of the country, if you lose power, you can bring power in from other places because they're on a national grid that's all connected. Here in Texas, for decades, we have had our own grid that stops at the borders of Texas, which means that we can't get electricity in from other parts of the country, which means that when we have a problem, we can't respond by getting help from other people. And that's one of the issues that that certainly the federal regulators are looking at and urging Texas to reconsider. Now, I see a question that says from Andres that it wasn't the 10% renewable energy that Abbott said failed and caused our blackouts. And appropriately, you put an LOL there because that was his and Fox News' first talking points, is that see what happens when you have the Green New Deal. And I mean, obviously, number one, we don't have the Green New Deal. But number two, the wind providers they weren't even counting on the wind providers because the wind providers did not make any commitment to provide any electricity during that time because they knew they were going to have the problem. And so it wasn't, and plus they're like less than 2 or 3% of the load that we're talking about. So the failure of wind was the least impactful aspect of any of this that caused the program. And in fact, we know that in other countries and other parts of this country, wind energy runs fine in the wintertime because they do the steps that they take to winterize. I mean, they have wind power in Norway, for God's sake. So if you take the appropriate precautions and the appropriate steps to ensure reliability, and companies know that they have to do that, and that if they do that, they won't suffer a financial penalty, then you can make the appropriate adjustments. All right, Alan. All right, we're going to try one more time. Everybody counting. I mean, is he here? Can we hear him? Alan? No, we can't hear you. Okay. All right, let me just say this. It's like when you're talking about electricity deregulation and the lights going out, the fact that the microphone's going out, it's not a good look for us. I mean, I'm humiliated, it's all right. It's not like we're giving up, but it's basically, the reason we can't hear Alan is because of the wind power, not working in West, right? Isn't that actually? No. So if this all stems from deregulation, then what we saw was Governor Abbott, and folks like Governor Abbott first trying to blame it all on renewable energy, which didn't work. Second of all, and he's actually had to walk that back since then. Second of all, what are we going to do about it? What they're trying to do is say that, it's ERCOT's fault or this agency's fault or that agency's fault. Look, the Republicans have been in charge of the state for several decades now. They're the ones that put these regulators in. They're the ones that have operated this system. They're the ones that ignored the warnings in 2011 to change the system when we had this happen before. They're the ones that need to be held accountable. They're the ones who need to understand that we need to put private profit out of running this whole state and running this system and put the people back in charge. And what that means is holding these electric providers to accountability. That means making sure that the system is operated for the public good, not for the good of just a few folks, the descendants of Enron, we call them, who manipulate the system for their own private and advantage and their own private profit. So what we will be doing, and what we hope you will join us in doing in the future, is bringing, the legislature is going to be having hearings on the 25th, both sides of the House and the Senate. And we're going to be making the point that we're not going to let them scapegoat a few bureaucrats who run the power grid in this state, that they need to take responsibility that goes to the top, number one. Number two, we need to re-regulate this system. We need to make sure that the system operates to keep the lights on and to keep people from freezing to death in the energy capital of the world, that it's completely unacceptable. And if they had any sense of honor and integrity, they would admit that, take responsibility, resign, move aside, and let us change the system like we need to. Look, this issue isn't going to go away. This issue is not going to go away. We're not going to let it go away. The people that have suffered and the people that have died as a result of this, their legacy will not allow us to do that. So we intend to fight. We intend to raise the issues. We intend to honor the work of those who bring electricity to us every day, even under these difficult conditions. It's the same thing with employees. What we said was going to happen with deregulation was companies were going to start cutting to the bone, because the lower they could get their costs, the more money they would make, and that they would be more than happy to risk the reliability of the system in exchange for shaving some expenses off their bottom line so that they could make a greater profit. And that's exactly what happened. It's not good for workers. It's not good for the workers who bring us power, and it's not good for the state as a whole. So we honor the folks in the IBEW. We honor the folks in AFSCME and all those who work so hard to bring us power every day. And we will fight for them and fight for the consumers of this state as we move forward. So as Alan has not been able to get back with us, I won't subject you to my ranting and raving anymore, but just tell you thank you for joining us. Next week, I urge you to join us because we're going to have a very special show that I'm not at liberty to tell you why right now, but I can tell you that you'll want to mark on your calendar next Monday at 5 o'clock to join us for another session of Labor Live at 5. So with that, I want to thank Alan. I want to apologize for the technical difficulties, but we appreciate y'all tuning in. We appreciate y'all's concern and your attention for what happens to workers in this state, and we look forward to seeing you next week. So until then, take care, stay safe, and we'll talk to you next week.